Welcome back, everyone. In this video, our goal is to learn how to use the Painting Smooth tool in our landscapes to create more realistic transitions between our landscape layers, because having harsh cutoffs and lines between our layers is really unnatural looking. So before this video, I have prepped an example of some landscape painting smoothing right here for you. So we've got some grass out here, and I painted some mud, and I smoothed the transition in between. How did we do that? Firstly, make sure you're in your map, sculpting map, or some other map with a landscape. And next, make sure that you have some sort of a landscape layer applied across your entire landscape. And I just had some grass, and I went to right-click and fill the layer in completely with grass. Now I'm going to get rid of my mud right here so I can demonstrate how I did this. I'm going to right click on my mud and I'm going to clear that layer. And now I am going to make sure I've got the mud layer selected, and I am going to paint some mud on my grass. Now the smooth tool is right here under landscape paint, but instead of the paint tool, I'm going to come one down to the smooth tool. Yes, in our paint tools, we do have some of the same sorts of tools as in our sculpting tab, the smooth tool. So with these parameters right here, I've got the basic tool strength of 0.3, filter kernel radius of 4, and my brush size per normal. I'm just going to rub this right about at this transition point right here. Left clicking, I'm holding down my left click, and you can see how it creates a nice smooth transition. Now, what this is essentially doing is it's adjusting the layer weighting between the two layers to create that smooth transition. More specifically, if I have 100% grass over here and 100% mud right here, it is gradually shifting that percentage weighting from mud being 100% to grass being 100%. Right about here is, say, 50-50. So the next thing I want to demonstrate is how the tool strength can affect your smoothing between two different painted layers. I've got some mud painted on here next to my grass, and there is a pretty sharp, harsh transition between the two. Now with my grass layer selected, I'm going to jack up my tool strength all the way up to 1. And I'm going to change my brush fall off and set that all the way down to 0. Now, if I do one rub along this transition seam right here, I'm just left clicking, holding down left click. You can see that it performs a pretty nice transition over a wide area. I'm just going to do Control Z, and let me change my tool strength down to something really low, like 0.05. And now, if I hold down left click and go down that same seam again, it does do some smoothing, only it doesn't do it over as wide of an area. It tends to do it in more of a narrow region. So I like to look at the tool strength as kind of a way to determine how wide of an area is that transition from one layer to another going to be taking place. Just going to do Control Z here again real quickly. Next, let's explore this filter kernel radius parameter. I look at this parameter as determining how drastic your smoothing is, and as the tooltip says, this is the radius over which your smoothing is performed over. Let me set my tool strength to be 0.3 here, and my brush fall off back to 0.5. The default value here is 4, but let me set this to 1, so that is going to perform smoothing over a smaller radius, and I'm just holding down left click, and as I bring this down, you can see that smoothing does happen, but it happens a little bit slower, and I would need more rubs to really kind of make that as smooth as maybe I wanted. Contrast that with, I'm going to hit Control Z here. I'm going to set my filter kernel radius up to 7, which is the max, which means it's going to smooth over a larger radius. So now if I left click and drag down the seam one time, it's going to perform a little bit more of a drastic change. Not much, but it is noticeable. I'll set this back to 1 again, just so you can see the before and after. That's with 1, and this is with 7. Just one left click and drag down that seam. Let's Control Z one more time, and I'm going to set my filter kernel radius back to its default. Let's explore Detail Smooth now. So with this checked on, it makes this parameter active. So small values preserve more details. Large values remove more details. So let's try a small value here like 0.1. If I left click along this transition, I'm going to hold down the left click. You see that that transition from mud to grass does happen, but it's in a very small kind of band that happens. Let me do Control Z on that. And now let me jack this all the way up to 0.99, left click and drag down here. And you can see how that transition almost looks equal across the entire band. In fact, this would go too far in terms of, it almost looks like there's more mud over here than there is over here. So that is a way you can influence that blending, that smoothing between two different layers. Now, one more thing to point out here is I have had my grass layer selected here while I've been trying to do some smoothing. I'm trying to smooth between mud and grass, and I can have either one of these selected in order to smooth between them. Note, however, if I was to select, say, rock, and I was to try to smooth, let me just set this back to default. I'm trying to smooth with a rock layer selected, and I'm going to hold down left click. Nothing happens because I don't have any rock layer here. So that's just one thing to keep in mind as you're working with the smooth tool, that you actually have to have that given layer selected, in this case grass, if you want to smooth between that particular layer and something else. So grass would work, or I can have mud selected and I can try to transition from mud to grass, grass to mud. Either or will do. All right, guys, that is going to do it for this discussion on the Paint Smooth tool. See you in the next one.